Hello everyone, welcome to Functional Nurse Academy Graduate Feature. For more information about Functional Nurse Academy, be sure to go to functionalnurseacademy.com. And here's your host, Nurse Melissa.
Welcome to the Functional Nurse Academy Graduate Feature. During this show, I love to spotlight the incredible journey of nurses who have transformed the way that they practice and also their mindset through the lens of functional medicine. My name is Melissa Schreibfatter, and I am the founder of the Functional Nurse Academy and Christian Functional Medicine Academy. In today's episode, I'm going to be sitting down with one of our amazing graduates and hear how she is using functional medicine and using her own independent business to change lives and redefine what it means to be a nurse in today's world. I have Secily Krehbiel with me, who is a registered nurse, board certified in functional medicine, and she is specializing in addressing the root causes of chronic conditions, especially autoimmune disorders, hormonal imbalances, digestive health. And after overcoming personal health challenges, she developed a holistic approach that addresses the whole person, focusing on gut health, hormone balance, and evidence-based nutrition. She helps her clients to achieve sustainable fat loss, increased energy, and better management of chronic conditions through comprehensive lab testing, personalized nutrition, stress management, and tailored exercise programs. She is the owner and founder of Optimal Functional Health. Welcome, Secily. It's great to have you back.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
And, I was reading through your bio and I was like, we just need more nurses out there doing this type of work. Because when I'm reading through and I'm kind of like autoimmune disorders, hormonal imbalances, digestive issues, I mean, how much of that do we see? And then it is like kind of nerve-wracking when, you are a nurse in the conventional medical model and there's a pill for every ailment, right? But then the roots are never being addressed. So can you tell our listeners how long have you been in the functional health space for?
So technically, I've only had my practice open since the beginning of the year, but I really started diving into the functional health space about 10 years ago. So I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I really, really struggled with even getting out of bed in the morning. I mean, and at this point I was in my, mid to late 30s, right? And I would wake up in the mornings and it would take me, a good 30 minutes for my ankles for me to be able to stand on them and get up and walk. And it was so frustrating to me because I thought at this age, I shouldn't feel like this. This is crazy, right? And on top of that, I was pretty healthy. I was an avid CrossFitter. I was now realizing that I shouldn't have done this, but I did. I was a adamant low carb keto gal. I realized I ketoed myself into a lot of dysfunction, which that's something we could probably get into. But I felt like I was healthy and doing the right things. And so it just didn't make sense to me. And of course I started going to rheumatologist after rheumatologist, and it's, well, this is genetic. This is your new reality. Here's a medication, just get used to it. Right. No, never a mention of my diet or checking my gut health or anything like that. Well, as a nurse, I was like, okay, hold on, I understand genetics and that doesn't make sense to me, right? Like I understand I can be predisposed for that gene. That doesn't mean that gene has to be turned on. So what have I done that has flipped that gene on, right? And so that's when I started really diving in on my own. And the interesting thing was I did go to a big functional medicine practice here where I live. And I think at this point, I think they mean well, but I think they had just gotten so big that I was just another number and being run through like a cattle chute, just another. And so it was just, they kept piling on supplements. And I'm like, but I don't understand why I need to keep spending hundreds of dollars in supplements when we don't really even know what caused this, like what started this, right? And so that was a little frustrating for me in that space. But then once I started doing my own research and learning on my own, I realized I was like, oh my gosh, I need to look at my gut. Like, this is crazy. So that's when I found FMA or FNA, and I learned so much just right off the bat when I started the course, and immediately did my own GI map. Really learned a lot about how dysfunctional my gut truly was. And once I went through, a gut cleanup, I like to call it the gut cleanup protocol. And there's not one specific one, obviously it's different for each person, but for me, the one I went through for what was going on with me, I was able to get myself completely off medication. And the swelling was completely gone. The pain was gone. Now, is that to say it doesn't flare up every now and then? Absolutely. Like if over the last several months, I've been not as diligent with my diet and what I'm putting in my mouth. And I can definitely tell I'm having, and just stress, right? Starting your own business, things like that. So I'm starting to have a flare up here and there. But the crazy thing now is I know what to do, right? So like, oddly enough, today I started back my gut protocol because I just know that's what it is. And I just know I need to clean it up. I'm not even going to run another GI map because I just know. I know how I feel. And I know if I can just cut out gluten and dairy and follow the 5R protocol, I know it will completely change it for me. And so that was a long-winded answer. Sorry about that. But that's what led me down this path. And then I realized there's so many people out there suffering like I was, and they shouldn't have to.
Yes. And your story sounds exactly like mine with Hashimoto's. Like everything that you're saying, I'm like, yep. And I remember for years, and this is why, and I also had that same experience when I was a patient at the first functional medicine practice I ever went to, where they were just loading me up with supplements. And that is one of the reasons why, and I know through FNA, you guys hear me gripe about like the over recommendation of supplements all the time, but I have seen too many functional practices that I do believe started with the best of intentions, but then they just get so big and their overhead gets so high. And then they develop that dependency on their patients taking all these supplements. But yeah, for years, I went through the conventional medical model. And this is why I'm kind of like, I just totally broke up with them. Like I'm done with them unless I get hit by a bus or something, or hopefully that won't happen. But for years, they were gaslighting me, telling me nothing was wrong, but they just were not ordering the right labs. And then it just didn't make sense that like, oh, this is your new normal. You're just going to keep getting worse. But I had that same experience. Like I still have Hashimoto's, which, the thyroid, the autoimmune condition that causes hypothyroidism. But I mean, my antibodies are like 100 versus them being 7,000. And as long as I am like taking care of myself, I've totally got my symptoms under control. So, but I think it's such a blessing when, sometimes we do go through that suffering, but then that is the best way to learn functional medicine is when you kind of go through some health issues on your own and you work on getting yourself better. And then, as nurses, we can combine our clinical expertise, get additional training, and there's so much we can do to help other people. And I know that we were chatting because usually when I do these shows and these features, I like to work on a topic that we think will just be tremendously helpful because, there's so many people dealing with all kinds of health issues. But I know we were talking about insulin resistance, which kind of is in that area of hormonal imbalance, metabolic health. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about insulin resistance? Like, what is it? What could be some potential symptoms associated with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So through my practice, this is something I've become super passionate about because I see it in almost every single client I work with. It is, unfortunately, most Americans are insulin resistant, which is just not, it's not good for us, right? The problem is metabolism in itself is the foundation of all health. It's, that's where we convert food into cellular energy. And when our metabolism falters, That really underpins 9 of the 10 leading causes of death in the US. And so when you have 93% of adults who are showing to be have suboptimal metabolism, and most of those are often presenting with insulin resistance, it's probably something we need to be, paying attention to. And I think what's crazy is it's the root of a lot of things that we don't even realize. So PCOS, for instance, that is the root cause, is insulin resistance. And a lot of clients, especially that come to me and are struggling with PCOS, that's never even been brought up to them. They're like, wait, what? What does that have to do with this? Like, isn't this a hormonal issue? Well, yes, it is a sex hormone issue, but it starts by you being insulin resistant to begin with. And I don't know if you see a lot of insulin resistance in clients that you work with.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So now, as you all know, I'm also just like, I'm very against like, oh, everyone, yeah, go ahead and take these like hundreds of supplements every month. Everyone gets the same thing. I'm also very against, well, let's just order all the same labs on everyone and yes, let's do like all of these functional medicine tests. However, there are certain really inexpensive labs that, because these issues are so prevalent in the US, we should be screening people every day. And one of those labs is a fasting insulin, which is not something that is going to be ordered at the primary care office because, again, they have on the handcuffs from the insurance companies who don't want to pay for it and also who financially benefit the sicker that we are. But a fasting insulin, if you're not using your insurance, guys, it costs $10. Like, it's a really inexpensive lab. And, you want to catch these things early. We don't want to wait, just sit around and wait until something breaks and then try to go in there and mop up the mess with pharmaceuticals. So, and to your point, I think it's very important to note that fasting insulin, it can detect insulin resistance years before a fasting glucose will, right? So it's strange to me that we just don't have a fasting insulin as a normal lab protocol for everybody that goes and has an appointment, right? Like, we should be looking on that. I mean, look at both, look at the glucose and the insulin, but insulin before the glucose, right? Because that's going to give you a heads up well before any metabolic dysfunction is actually even taking place. And another thing that's important to note, so, when you're going to just get your like annual physical, there are labs that they will order yearly, which are great, but always remember they're using the standard reference ranges, which is reflective of the health of the very, very, very sick, metabolically unhealthy US population. So, with things like a fasting glucose, that is something that is going to be ran every year at your PCP's office, but sometimes you can be developing insulin resistance, but your fasting glucose can be normal. And even the hemoglobin A1C, which is reflective of like a 3-month average of your blood glucose, that also can be normal, or it can be suboptimal high and not even flagged because we're using such outdated reference ranges. But a fasting insulin, that is something, it is so much easier to resolve these issues if you catch it early. But say that you went to your like standard provider and you're like, hey, can you order a fasting insulin on me? And then say that your fasting insulin comes back and it's a level of 20, and then your doctor's like, oh, that level's just fine. The reference range is insane. It's 0 to like 24. And the most current research is showing us that an optimal fasting insulin level is around a 5. Are you seeing that, Cicely, where people that you've worked with, they're like, well, I went to, my doctor and they said that my labs are fine?
Yes, absolutely. And most of the time I have them present the labs that they've had done. And again, there's no fasting insulin on there. It's a fasting glucose. And they are getting better about running hemoglobin A1Cs, which I'm glad. But again, that range is so broad, and most of them are at the very peak. Like, I so funny. I was sitting with a girlfriend of mine over the weekend for 4th of July. We were at like a resort with our families, and she was talking to me about just having some labs done. And so of course she pulls them up and we start looking through them, and she's worried more about her sex hormones, which rightly so, she's at that age. But I look at her hemoglobin A1C and I'm like, girlfriend, like, forget the sex hormones. We got to get this under control like now. Like, I said, this is pre-diabetic. Did they not tell you that? And she's like, no. I was like, yeah, like that, even in the normal reference range, that's pre-diabetic. Like nothing was ever even said to her about it, which is beyond me. Like because that's her focus was the sex hormones, which again, what we have to remember is all of this is intertwined, right? If you have insulin resistance, that is going to make your sex hormones off, right? So it's like, we got to look at the whole picture and quit siloing these things into individual compartments, because that's not the way the human body works. It is one big web that is interconnected, and we have to focus on everything as a whole. So yeah, I saw that with her this weekend, and it just blew my mind. I'm like, just when I think things might be getting a little better in the traditional, right? Because I will say, now we're starting to see the hemoglobin A1C being more of a common lab run, which thank goodness it needs to be, but we also need to add that fasting insulin in there. We need a HOMA IR. That would be a good score to have. But just when I think, okay, maybe we're seeing some progress, then I have to see a case like that where I'm like, they didn't even talk to you about this. Like, this is going to be the underlying issue of everything you're struggling with right now. Like you're having trouble losing weight. You're insulin resistant. Your hormones are off. Insulin resistance. Like it's just crazy to me that's wasn't even addressed.
Yeah. So this happens so many times where I get someone's medical records and I am just like, it's like so bad you just can't look away. And I wonder, I'm like, how do these? And I try not to be so negative. It's increasingly more difficult for me to not be like more negative and sassy when I am this pregnant. But I just like, it's like pretty unbelievable to me how many people go through so much suffering and like unnecessary suffering, I mean, we're all of these people. And I did do a show on peptides a couple of weeks ago where we were discussing the appropriate use of peptides and things like that. But I am seeing a lot of these cases where the providers are recommending, some of the high risk peptides like the GPL1 agonists. They're recommending them inappropriately and not even assessing these people's hormones and not even running the most appropriate markers. So I would love to hear your feedback on that when, someone is having difficulty losing weight, which again, I see this all the time, especially with women that are like in their 30s and 40s, and they're exercising and they are doing a lot of the right things, but they feel like the weight is packing on and they get frustrated and they're being prescribed weight loss injections without a full workup. I would love to hear your feedback on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's multiple arms to this. Okay. So a lot of times when a client presents with struggling with losing weight, yes, we need a full workup because for every single individual, it's a different reason. And again, everything is tied together. So we need to look at your cortisol. What's your cortisol level like? We need to look at your fasting insulin and HOMA IR to see if you're insulin resistant. We do need to look at your hormones. That's very important, especially when we get into the perimenopause, menopausal ages, like hormones are very, very important to look at that point. I think GLP-1s have a place. I think, we're getting some really incredible emerging research on some other indications and things that they are going to help with. Like cancer prevention, neurodegenerative diseases. We're seeing a lot of incredible things. I just attended Peptide Congress a few weeks ago, and they presented the research there, and I was blown away. I was like, "What? This is nuts." The problem is right now is you're right. They're you can just go online to any telehealth company, and you never even see a physician or talk to a nurse practitioner or talk to anybody clinical at all. You fill out a questionnaire and pay them several $100s, and then they mail you the medication, right? That is so weird to me. Like, I don't understand that at all. Like, how in the world are we legally getting away with that, right? Because you're not even seeing the patient. You know, in the traditional, even in the traditional healthcare model, for the most part, you have to form some sort of patient provider relationship, and the prescribing provider usually has to lay eyes on that patient. So obviously there's a loophole because telehealth companies are popping up all over the place. But then, okay, so now what? So now they get this GLP-1. A lot of times they're not even really sure how to inject it or where to inject it. Nobody has ever talked to them about changing their diet or lifestyle, which is a huge part of that, right? Because here's the thing, I have seen clients that have been on GLP-1s and they weren't guided on any type of diet or nutrition changes. They didn't lose weight. And they're like, this is frustrating. Why am I not losing weight on this? Okay, well, let's talk about your diet. Well, there you go. You still have to change your diet. And the other thing is, I'm noticing a lot of providers are ramping up the dose very quickly. And what most providers and most people don't understand about GLP-1s is less is more, actually. The lower doses are actually going to be more beneficial for you, and higher is actually not good and more dangerous. But again, those conversations aren't happening because there's no care involved with this, which there should be. This is still a medication, so to speak. So we still need to have some guidance. And I think the biggest part of that for me is, or the frustrating part is seeing there isn't any guidance given around nutrition and lifting weights, right? Because we know it's going to go after the muscle. That's proven. That's not false. That is a proven fact. We have to maintain muscle as we age for our health and for just stability, right? And so we've got to lift weights. So you've got to know how to lift weights, when to lift weights. You need to be eating a lot of protein, like high amount of protein. I typically like to guide clients to about I'm losing my train of thought here. 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, right? Like that's, if you're taking a GLP-1, that's what you need to be eating. And a lot of times, clients will say, well, I can't eat that because of this GLP-1. Then that means your dose is too high. Because the goal with a GLP-1 is for you not to eat, right? Because and you know this as well as anybody, Melissa, think about this. If you're not eating, think of all the micronutrients that you're voiding your body of, that your body has to have to function. So now what are we doing? Now we're creating issues like Hashimoto's and other issues because we're missing a lot of vital micronutrients from the food because in our standard American diet anyway, we don't get them, a lot of them. But now if you're not eating anything, right, or you're eating 1 meal a day, you really are playing with your health by doing that. And so I really just I think GLP-1s have their place, but I agree they need to be done the right way. And so, if there's anybody out there listening that's considering a GLP-1, please find a provider that knows what they're doing and is not just writing a script and handing it over, because you should have some guidance around using it. But then on that note too, work with a provider that's going to look for root causes and is going to go, well, hold on a minute. Why are you not losing weight? Let's start there before we just give you a medication.
And that's so interesting. You're talking about how there's so much inappropriate use. And I've heard a lot of this where people are getting these medications without seeing a provider face to face, or they're getting it from a provider with very little education on it. And when you hear about this just crazy spike in demand and how these medications are being marketed, it's also really important to note that the GLP-1 market is the world's largest and fastest expanding market. There's a lot of revenue that is being made. And I think that it's at people's expense because, again, there's that massive lack of informed consent. And again, like you're mentioning, if someone is having difficulty losing weight, and again, like this can be a potential tool in the toolbox of medicine if used appropriately, but most of the time it's not being used appropriately. And I want to give you another example. So you mentioned people are eating much less on these drugs. Well, a lot of the people that are dealing with things like weight loss resistance, even obesity, actually are nutrient deficient. The nutrient deficiencies that are associated with insulin resistance specifically are magnesium, chromium, and magnesium. And people are this is something that's not being evaluated. So sometimes something that can seem complex, or people think that they need to be on a medication or ongoing medications, sometimes the root causes of that may be fixing your diet, repleting essential nutrients, working on the gut. That may be a little bit more work in the beginning, but then you're going to have, lifelong lasting benefits from, investing in your health. Well, we are about halfway through the show. I would love to cover more when we come back just on root causes and solutions for people, because people need solutions. There's so much going on. And I think that we're always being hit with just conflicting information about everything. So it's hard for people to, understand, okay, what is actually good information and what's not. So I will see you on the other side of the break. If you are a nurse that is fed up with the sick care model, I have a solution for you. My name is Melissa Schreibfetter, and I am the owner and founder of the Functional Nurse Academy. FNA is the most comprehensive functional medicine training program on the market, specifically tailored to nurses. It is self-paced and equips LPNs, RNs, and nurse practitioners to practice functional medicine, address the root causes of dysfunction, and start their independent functional medicine practices. At FNA, you will learn how to order labs, functional health reports, create customized wellness plans, package and price your services, and even how to market your brand effectively. Graduates earn 90 nursing CEUs, and then they qualify for multiple board certification titles. They also will have access to our exclusive tools, such as our Functional Nurse Toolkit, our social media and marketing kit. And I don't want to just train you and send you on your way. So you also will get access to me each month via the Functional Nurse Academy monthly mentorship program, where you will be able to attend a live class with me each month. So say goodbye to sick care and start your dream career as a functional medicine nurse. Enroll today at functionalnurseacademy.com. Hello and welcome back to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. This is your show host, Melissa Schreibfetter, and I am joined today by one of my Functional Nurse Academy graduates, Secily Krehbiel. And Secily started her own practice, Optimal Functional Health, which is located in Austin, Texas, where she is helping a lot of people on investigating what are the root causes of this dysfunction that you're dealing with in the body. Because again, as nurses and as health and wellness professionals, we understand the vast majority of chronic diseases in our country, up to 75%, are connected to lifestyle and dietary. So why not address those things? Welcome back, Secily.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention, so I'm actually at your practice website. It looks lovely, by the way. I know last time we did a show together, it was, I think you mentioned that your husband was working on it, but it looks really nice. And you are in Austin, right?
I am.
Okay, great. I did want to ask you as well, because we have, listeners, of course, all over the country. And are you seeing clients in other states or just in Austin?
So yeah, I actually do have, I can see in most states, there's a couple of the few of the small ones that we can't, but for the most part, yes, every state is accepted.
Okay, wonderful. So for our listeners, because I I just know that I'm going to have people that are going to be like, okay, I need to reach out to this nurse because there's so many people. I mean, like our healthcare in our country, like I do have hope. Like, I think that with all of the frustration of how conventional medicine has been going, I think that there's going to be more health professionals that are going to exit the system, and we're going to have more concierge services like this. But I will be putting Cecily's website and her information in the show notes if anyone wants to connect with her. And, before we went to break, we were talking about insulin resistance and about how it can cause you to gain more weight. It also can be like a domino effect, and it can affect your other hormones. And what we're seeing in medicine is, instead of these things even being tested for or addressed, a lot of people are just being prescribed medication, and they're not really getting better. So I wanted to ask, so when we talk about when someone becomes insulin resistant, so we know, of course, there's like a dietary component there. What are some other things that people should do to support their health to prevent this from happening to them?
Yeah. So I think, like you just said, I think first and foremost is your diet. I think we have to make sure we're focusing on whole foods. With my clients, our saying is, if it comes from the ground or has a mother, it's acceptable, and very protein forward. We want to stay away from the processed Franken foods, right? The Franken foods are a lot of what's making us insulin resistant and making us so metabolically unhealthy. Some other things that I've found that have been really beneficial for myself included, and I like to wear a continuous glucose monitor every now and then and kind of really track what I'm doing and what's working and what helps, kind of decrease those spikes. And some things I've found that not only worked for me, but also clients, is carb cycling is huge. If you've never done carb cycling, that's a great way to really help correct insulin resistance in a natural way. So like a lot of my clients, or for me personally, I do 2 low carb days, and then the other 5 days are regular macro days. And the reason for that is there are some benefits to the low carb diet. But what happens with a lot of people is they do low carb just all the time or continuously. Well, normally what happens there is you start to see some bad effects of that, right? So with carb cycling, you're getting the benefits of both the low carb diet and a regular macro diet, but you're also still able to build, and I'm a huge muscle proponent. So I think, if you've not read the book Forever Strong by Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, I highly recommend it. Muscle is the organ of longevity. And so it's so important that we're eating to support our muscle, not only to maintain the muscle, because as we age, we know we lose muscle, right? And so we need to eat to not only maintain what we have, but also build a little more. Intermittent fasting is a phenomenal way to help correct insulin resistance. Exercise, doing resistance training actually has been shown to improve insulin resistance. Stress management, right? So really making sure that we have some sort of sleep routine, and we're really trying to optimize our sleep the best we can. And a lot of people think with sleep management, a lot of times, that it's how long you're sleeping. Studies are starting to show that it's not so much how long you're sleeping, it's how long you get into that deep state of sleep, right? And so, and if you do anything that tracks, you'll know it's kind of hard to get. So, really working with a health coach or a functional health provider that's going to work with you on sleep optimization, so we can really drive down those cortisol levels. The other thing, this is interesting. Did you know that if you take a 20 to 30 minute walk right after you eat, it lowers your glucose by 30 to 35%. So my husband and I have gotten in a routine where every meal we eat, we go for a walk. He works in an office somewhere, so he walks around his building. When he's home at night, we walk in the evenings together. But yeah, and studies even show that, 7,000 steps or greater a day is linked to all-cause mortality, lower all-cause mortality. So we need to be moving all the time, right? And so those are just some of the basic way, or not basic, but some of the more holistic ways that you can really help correct that insulin resistance. The other thing I really like to do with clients is have them wear a continuous glucose monitor. You can get them over the counter now. There's even a company I've partnered with now where it provides an app. So you can take, a picture of what you're eating and it tracks it for you. And then it monitors your glucose and your insulin after those meals. And so that allows you to see, okay, what is it that I'm eating? Because here's the thing, for everybody, it's different. So a physician I used to work with back in the day, we're friends, and he and I both were wearing a CGM at the same time. And so we were comparing notes because, us weird science people, we like to experiment even on ourselves. So for him, with pasta, it would not spike his glucose. Me, every time it would spike it. With him, white rice would spike it. So he would go have sushi and think, what the heck is in the sushi that's causing this? Well, then he figured out through process of elimination that it was the white rice, right? So for every single person, it's different. So I highly encourage people to go get a CGM, wear it for 2 to 4 weeks, and just get an idea of how your body's responding to everything, to food, to movement, to sleep, all the things. So those are the places I like to start with my clients. And then of course, as we were talking about before the break, GLP-1s have a place, and in the right client, that might be an option. But if you're not doing all the lifestyle things before that, really a GLP-1 is going to be useless for you, if not make things worse for you.
And another thing about the GLP-1s is they can cause significant muscle loss. And guys, when we're talking about strength training and things like that, that is one of the best things that you can do for your body. And even if you don't have a gym membership, there are so many just like free strength training exercises that you could look up on YouTube and do at home. And when you are lacking muscle mass, that is terrible for your body and can actually set you up for all of these just negative downstream effects when it comes to your hormones, because again, you need to have enough muscle mass for healthy hormone production. There's so many other benefits to it. And again, it makes me, when you talk about all the walking, it makes me think of Europe. I remember when we went to Europe, we did a cruise on our honeymoon, and we were like, these people, like no one is drinking water. They're like drinking wine and eating bread all day, and everyone is skinny. And like, yes, the food in the US is just crap. I mean, we have had some issues with our regulation, but also in a lot of places in Europe, there are so many people that live in walkable cities. And this is really a detriment of the US, as a lot of people have office jobs, guys. And like, we're not, God didn't design our bodies to sit all day. And then people come home from their office job and they're tired and they don't feel good because they probably already have insulin resistance. So then they go through like the drive-through or something. And there's so many just American habits. And we are, individuals that like convenience. And a lot of these things that we do for convenience, we're going to pay for it later. But and also the continuous glucose monitors. So that is something that, I've heard some backlash about that. And again, it's not something that you have to wear all the time. I think that is if it's something that's in your budget, I think it can be tremendously helpful. Because again, with what you're saying, you may be eating something regularly that may appear seemingly healthy, that may be spiking your blood sugar. And when we're consistently spiking our blood sugar like that, high blood sugar is like throwing fuel on the fire, and it can spike inflammation like crazy, which again, when you have a history of an autoimmune condition, you have a history of a, mental illness, whatever kind of underlying issues that you may have, consistently spiking your blood sugar is going to make it worse. And I did want to, I know you mentioned before about how you had some negative impacts, negative effects of doing keto. And I wanted to share this experience with you and get your feedback. So, and again, this was another motivation to start functional medicine education programs, because I just think that there are a lot of good providers out there. So many of the ones that I worked with, I mean, it took me 3 years to find one that really helped me. But I had a provider, and I was actually, I feel like I was underweight at the time. And she told me to consume no more than 30 carbs a day, because if I consumed more carbs than that, then it could be bad for my liver. And she was a nurse practitioner. So I did that for a few days, and then I felt like I was going to die. I would love to hear your feedback on that.
So here's the thing with like anything in life, everything to some extent is okay in moderation, right? So I think keto diets / low carb diets are fine in a short stint. I think doing them long term is, it's not even I think, it's proven. It is detrimental to your health. Your body needs carbohydrates to function. It needs it to produce hormones. It needs it. Carbs are not bad. And we got this idea that carbs were what was making us fat. We had the idea that fat was making us fat, and we learned that was wrong too, right? So it's like, it's a balance of everything. And I think that's where, you mentioned earlier, a lot of times a root cause of all things is being nutrient depleted, like being depleted of nutrients, right? If you're not eating all the food groups, if you're not getting protein, fat, and carbohydrates, there's going to be micronutrients that you're going to miss. And then therefore, that's going to lead to issues, right? I low carbed and ketoed for like several years, where that's all I did. Like there was no time off, and I truly think that could have led to, some insulin resistance for me. I think that led to a very unhealthy gut microbiome. And I think that ultimately led to the autoimmune issue. But again, I don't want to say keto's bad, don't ever do it. I think it needs to be done in the right circumstance and for a short amount of time. So again, I'm a big proponent of carb cycling. I think carb cycling is, you're getting the best of both worlds. And again, there's great studies behind carb cycling that show that it really does help correct that insulin resistance in a natural way without having to depend on a GLP-1 or something to that extent.
And also, when we talk about carbohydrates, just like we're now learning, I remember, when I grew up, I was born in the 80s, and it was like low fat everything, right? And now we have now come to the conclusion that fat is not the enemy, but then it's like carbs are the enemy. But we also must understand, okay, is that carb that you're eating, was that created by God, or is that carb from like a donut or a Pop-Tart? So, it's like when we're eating things like, sweet potatoes, things, berries, fruit. Like I even had practitioners tell me not to consume fruit because they were like, there's sugar in the fruit, but it's like, okay, yeah, There's also fiber and there's antioxidants. And I feel like we see a lot of damage being done in conventional medicine because they have very little, if any, training on nutrition. And if they do have the nutrition training, it's the government nutrition training, which is not that great. But then we just also get a lot of bad information in functional medicine and fear mongering about food. So, and again, like we know that our bodies are so brilliantly designed, and our bodies need to have minerals and nutrients and antioxidants. For an example, for our hormone production, we need to have minerals as precursors for that. So again, we also don't want people to feel restrictive, like so restrictive on their dieting. But again, we really should limit those hyper processed foods that lack nutritional value. And with carb cycling, and I wanted to mention something else too. So keto is really hot right now. I've heard a lot of people and they're like, oh, I'm doing keto and I feel good. But a lot of times when people do keto, they are also cutting out processed sugar and processed foods. So that may be why they feel better, not because they're on this super low carbohydrate diet. But our bodies are all different. And when you significantly reduce your carbohydrate intake, the body then is burning fat for fuel. Well, if you have poor fatty acid metabolism, which I think this is what happened to me when that provider was like, no more than 30 carbs, Melissa. Yeah, you can have half of a sweet potato and a handful of berries. So that can be your carbs for the day. But anyway, so I crashed on that, and it can actually cause hormonal stress and things like that, because if you're not getting enough carbohydrate intake and you are not properly metabolizing the fats from your diet, that is going to increase your cortisol, your master stress hormone, which again, when that is out of whack, that can negatively affect your gut, your hormones, your sleep cycle, and then this person can end up getting much worse. But I like what you mentioned about the carb cycling, and I also think it's good for people to document how you feel. The body speaks to us in symptoms. So if the body is struggling with something, the body will tell you in symptoms. If you are doing something like changing your diet, changing your lifestyle, and then you start to feel better, lean into that. Like, what did you change this week? Maybe we should do more of that. But can you tell me a little bit more about the carb cycling for like a week? Like how many days would you want to go like more on the lower carbohydrate side? And then what would those other days look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I want to add to your point, when we're talking about carbohydrates, again, the same principle still applies that we talked about earlier, if it comes from the ground or has a mother, right? So when we're thinking, and I used to be the same way. I used to think of a carbohydrate as like pasta, bread, cake, right? But we forget that berries are carbohydrates, apples are carbohydrates, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, rice. So I really get my clients to focus on good complex carbs like a sweet potato, a regular potato, rice, jasmine rice. Now, if that doesn't spike you, see, that's another benefit of a CGM, because some people don't do as well with white rice. Some people do great with it. And so again, think from the ground, because most carbs are from the ground. And so typically in a week, what we would do, or I would have my clients do, is so in our program, we do Monday, Tuesdays are our low carb days, and we do 50 grams of carbs. And then the other macronutrients are balanced around that, depending on, so this is the other thing, we really individualize each macro count to the person, because what I need in a day for my body and where I'm at is not going to be the same as you, pregnant or not pregnant. But, so we really want to take into consideration. So I always have we do a full assessment, and of course we look at labs, and then we base your macro split. And by the way, for those that don't know, macronutrients, which I was shocked that more people don't know this, but they don't. Macronutrients are those big nutrients that we need. So protein, fat, carbs, and fiber. Fiber is a huge one that most of us do not get enough of. And so we want to really balance those to best serve your body and season of life that you're in. So, but on our 2 low carb days, we stay around 50 grams of carbs, unless you have, so a different case scenario might be if I do have someone that's true hypothyroidism, I might bump them up to 100 grams of carbs, right? Because we need to take that into consideration. But for most people, 50 grams works. And then so that's Monday, Tuesday. And then Wednesday through Sunday, it's a regular macro day. So that depends on your macro split. But like I'll give you mine, for example. I just redid mine. So that's why I don't know it off the top of my head. So like we're on a low carb day today. So let me get to Wednesday. So my carbs on a regular carb day are 156 grams. So, but again, that's catered towards me, because I'm in a specific time where, yes, I am still working on a little insulin resistant correction, but also I'm a big believer in the DEXA scan, and I am trying to drop a little more visceral fat and a little more body fat and put on just a little bit more muscle mass. And again, that's specific to me just because I've been working towards this and I'm just kind of altering as I go for what my goals are. But even if somebody doesn't even want to track all of their macros, then I would say, spend 2 days focused on just 50 to 75 grams of carbs, and then the rest of the time eat normally. The other thing I would add to that is protein first. So the other thing you can help do to prevent extreme spikes in blood sugar is especially when your first meal of the day, because technically whether you think you're intermittent fasting or you're not, you are, right? Because most people don't, I'm so sorry. Most people don't, eat while they're sleeping, right? So you're fasting to some extent while you're sleeping. When you eat that first meal of the day to break that fast, if you just eat a muffin, you're going to shoot your blood sugar through the roof. So we really want to make sure we're balancing that with a healthy fat and a protein. And I try to encourage clients, eat that protein and that fat first. One, it's going to keep your blood sugar from spiking. The other thing it does is it actually helps you become fuller quicker. So then you're more likely to eat, not overeat. So really focus on things like that. Again, I tell my clients all the time, never start with a carb. Don't eat a carb first. It'll spike your blood sugar. And that's what ultimately leads to insulin resistance. So it's just little things like that we can work on that can really help you. And we have to remember, for those of you that aren't providers out there, insulin resistance is the precursor to pre-diabetes and then type 2 diabetes, right? So that's where you're headed with insulin resistance. And that's important. I mean, again, it's also the underlying, or the root cause of dyslipidemia. So if you have cholesterol issues, a lot of times it's starting with hormonal imbalance, but also insulin resistance, inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, which has to do with your heart. And then, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We're seeing that's been really, really prevalent lately. And then of course, PCOS, that makes me so sad because we see so many women. Don't you feel like that the infertility is just on this all-time high right now?
And I cannot imagine what that is like for those women. Because again, as someone that is technically having back-to-back babies, when the female body is ready for a baby, it is ready for a baby. And I cannot imagine what these women go through when they are unable to naturally conceive. And then so many of them go through hell with all of these fertility and IVF treatments and things like that. And again, we should be evaluating why you are having these issues. But and another thing about when we're on the road to developing type 2 diabetes. So this condition significantly increases the risk factors for things like cardiovascular disease, even dementia. They're starting to call dementia type 3 diabetes because there's such a significant link there. So really by, doing some early assessment and getting these things under control and these interventions that you're talking about, these are not these crazy expensive interventions. It's kind of like getting back to the basics and then also understanding a little bit of the biohacking and things like that. So, I did want to touch real quick since you are the Functional Nurse Academy feature for July. So I wanted to touch base with you about your experience with Functional Nurse Academy.
Oh my gosh. I loved Functional Nurse Academy. What I loved about the program was not only was it very comprehensive from the functional health / medicine space, it also brought a lot of business education to it. So that was something I found very valuable, where I know there's a lot of courses out there where they just focus on the functional medicine / health piece, but there's never, clinicians across the board are not known to be the best business people. So I really appreciated having that as part of it. I also love that, I have lifetime access to the curriculum. On a daily basis, I still go back to the curriculum and use it all the time. She's really good about giving you all sorts of templates to work with, which is also nice because a lot of that stuff is so tedious and time consuming. And you also feel a little lost when you're looking at all the different templates. You're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So having that, just you providing those was incredible. And I like too that, it's Christian based. I like that it comes from a place of rooted in God, because at the end of the day, that's our creator. He knows us best. And I feel like your approach comes from that too, from your heart and what you're trying to do just across the board with being part of the change in our healthcare speaks volumes, because we need it. It's so needed. And we've got to keep showing up and being better for our population and for other Americans out there, for the PCOS women out there that are struggling, because to your point, that is heartbreaking to me and I can't even imagine. And I want people to get the help that they deserve and they need and get the right guidance.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you enjoyed the program. And yeah, I'm always thinking about providing tools and, information for nurses that are crazy busy. Because again, as nurses, we go to nursing school, not business school. So sometimes we get our training and then we want to go and become entrepreneurs. And then so many nurses are like, oh, I don't know what to do from there. So that's why I really wanted to combine it. But again, we really can do God's work in this world, because we've always had chronic disease and illness and things like that because we live in a fallen world. But over half of the population is not supposed to be chronically ill. Like something is wrong. And we need more, providers and practitioners that understand these modalities and know how to successfully implement them the correct and appropriate way to help people get better. So now tell me a little bit more about optimal functional health. Say that someone, so I mentioned earlier that I will be listing your website and your links in the show notes, but say if someone is interested in working with you, like, are they able to book a initial consult with you? How does that work?
Yeah, so I offer what I call a free discovery call, and that's just where we can get on the phone and kind of see what you're looking for, what you're dealing with, and then we kind of go from there. And I actually don't. I used to do packages where I was like, okay, here's my 3 packages, you can pick or whatever. I don't do that anymore because, again, my goal is to create a more individualized approach, and there's not going to be 3 packages that are going to fit everybody. So it's really out of that discovery call. We kind of discuss some options and then go from there. There's obviously no pressure or commitment or anything like that. I just like to get on and, introduce ourselves to each other, really understand what you're looking for and make sure that I can serve you in that way. And you can just go through the website to schedule that. I also am on social media. You can reach out to me on there. On Instagram, it is, I got to look, I forgot. Isn't that terrible? It's Optimal with Secily, Secily. And then on Facebook, it's just under Secily Krehbiel. So either way, and I, what's funny is I probably do more business through social media than I do anything, which I guess that's the world we live in now. But so any of those places you can reach out to me. I try to post as much educational content as I can on social media just to help others get informed. So even if you're just looking for a little bit of knowledge or information, go follow me.
Okay, wonderful. And I'm going through your website and I'm like, this is designed so beautifully. And I love how you have all of your different services listed there. So yes, so definitely if you're interested in working with a functional practitioner who is also a nurse, then reach out to Secily. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, anytime.
Thank you for tuning in to the Functional Nurse Academy graduate feature. If this conversation inspired you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow nurse who may be ready to level up in their career. If you want to be our next success story, feel free to visit functionalnurseacademy.com. If you are not a nurse, if you're in another healthcare specialty, I can train you as well. So go to christianfma.com for that training program. And until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless.
This was brought to you by Functional Nurse Academy. For more information, please visit functionalnurseacademy.com.